been a remarkably busy week for crypto investors. So let's now bring in Adam Lynch, director at Schwab Equity Research, to help us break it all down. Adam, we'd like to start with a look at price activity, just going back to the basics here. Bitcoin near all-time highs touched earlier in May, but still above 100,000, obviously. So what are you watching for as far as recent price activity?
Yeah, hi, Jenny. Bitcoin has been on quite a ride since Liberation Day. Been up towards 110, down into the 70s, and now we are sitting just below that all-time high of about 110,000. It has been a very interesting past month. What we've seen is Bitcoin maintain above $100,000 for over 30 consecutive days now, even with a 10% pullback in there. And I think that's a really important thing to note. It's been showing strength and maintaining this sort of position above that really important kind of psychological number of $100,000, right? We've all heard the crazy projections that folks make, $1 million by the end of the year from Michael Saylor, some other folks. But what I've really started to see recently is more reputable sources. I think those with less conflict of interest are actually making some projections, seeing it up 120, 125, 130 towards the end of the year. So that's the kind of price point that I'm looking for and the upside that I see sort of over that next 3 to 6 months. If we turn our attention to Ethereum, I think we have a little bit of a more interesting case. It's up about 2%, I think it was today, trading above its long-term average of $2,800. So that's a very important thing. It hit a 15-week high and is essentially broken out of this consolidation pattern it's been in for the past month or so in that $2,400 to $2,700 range. Unlike Bitcoin, it hasn't reached its highs that it had at the start of the year. So I think there's still some room to grow there. And then just sitting above that average and breaking through it over the last 24 hours. Last week, Nate mentioned that what bulls will want to see is that breakthrough through the 2650 mark and then closes above this 200-day simple moving average. So we need to kind of keep an eye on it over the next few days, see if we can get a couple of those closes to really establish that bullish pattern. I've been asked a lot, what's caused this kind of recent run up, and it's really been a lot of inflows coming into the market. We've had products from Ethereum bringing in 7 weeks, total of $1.5 billion. I think there was almost 300 million that rolled in last week. This uptick in institutional confidence stems from a few different things. The Ethereum Foundation has made a couple of internal changes, and then they actually made a technological upgrade back in May that's helped make transactions a lot more efficient. I think almost 10x, helped increase staking limits. Both of these are really big positive signs for Ethereum.
Yeah, and especially as you can see there demonstrated by the 50-day moving average. I mean, the stark reversal we're seeing in trend here is also encouraging, given its underperformance to just Bitcoin, of the futures products at least. And there's also, of course, in the entirety of this space, a lot going on in Washington, D.C. that could be affecting crypto investors. So walk us through the top headlines we're getting from Capitol Hill.
Yeah, this one is very dynamic, right? This changes pretty much every day. There's a new launch, a new law, somebody passes something. So we've just got a couple of things that we can cover today. The big news today is that the Senate was set to vote on the Genius Act. The names of these acts are great. That one stands for Guiding and Establishing National Innovation in U.S. Stablecoins Act. All it does is basically introduce a regulatory framework for these stablecoin issuers, sets rules for transparency, reserve requirements, those sorts of things. If we've got viewers who aren't familiar with what a stablecoin is, it's just a type of cryptocurrency that's designed to maintain a stable value because it's pegged to an underlying external asset. Those are often currencies like USD. USDC is essentially the biggest of these. There are also those established with commodities like gold. The goal of them is to provide more stable alternative to traditional cryptos like Bitcoin and Ether. The act is meant to basically make this financial system, consumers, everybody safe. It's expected to pass. So I think we will see this one go through. Most people think that it will be done by the August recess. Then finally, today, I just saw that the House Financial Services Committee advanced an act called the Crypto Clarity Act. That essentially delineates, it separates the responsibility of the SEC and the CFTC. It mandates that the CFTC has to register crypto platforms, and they protect non-custodial wallets. So there's a handful of things in there. I think the key takeaway here is that this is just the beginning. We're in the first inning of trying to essentially establish this regulatory framework for all of these digital assets. And given that bipartisan support, I think we are going to see it continue to move forward.
Okay, and you briefly mentioned USDC. So to pivot on that, of course, the issuer of the stablecoin Circle had an IPO that well exceeded expectations. I mean, we saw an IPO price of $31 a share, closed as high as 107 in that first week of trading, then touched over 138 earlier this week. So it has been on a tear. Also at the time of taping, up almost 10% here. So walk us through, I mean, like what the appetite for that IPO really signals for hopefully what we see is now a trend in the IPO market.
Yeah, I think this is a really big signal. So you mentioned, yeah, it was supposed to IPO around $30 or so. I think it hit 80. I believe it was up at around 120 today, up 45% since last Thursday. Investors are going to love those types of numbers in a story like that. I think the price of it is an important thing to kind of keep an eye on for this one in particular. The firm Circle essentially derives most of its income from investments that it makes in short-term US treasuries, right? So if there is an increase or a decrease in rates, that's a very important thing to them. So a 25 bip decrease could cause their earnings to drop by about $100 million based on an estimate from Fundstrat. I think that's just an important thing to note, given that the market is pricing in, about a 90% cut for the next 6 months, maybe 4 by the end of the year, some people are saying. So I think it's important for anybody that's holding Circle, an investor in it, to note that. From a bigger perspective, right, the enormous success of this is going to drive more activity. This was almost a perfect storm, I think. We had a crypto-related company that was in a market that is starving for IPO activity. One fund out there has already started to try and create different strategies, right? So we've had ETFs already launched on Circle. I think 3 or 4 issuers have already filed them. Some are trying to deliver 2x performance. Others are covered call strategies. So I think it's pretty obvious that we're just going to continue to see more and more things here. Last week, Nate had mentioned how some similar firms to Circle had essentially come to market via SPAC, right? Not the traditional IPO route. I think it's pretty clear that given Circle's success on the traditional IPO route, that we're going to see more and more. I just read an article before I popped in here that Peter Thiel's backed crypto exchange Bullish, I think is what it's called, has filed for an IPO. So I think we're just going to see more and more and more. Now, whether or not that's a good thing is, I think, a question. It's a bit of a double-edged sword. All of this increase in demand and interest is great, but if we get flooded with too much supply, then demand's going to suffer. So could these new companies lead to investment dollars moving away from your more traditional cryptos like Bitcoin and Ether, other stocks that have already done stuff like this, like MicroStrategy? I think we're just going to have to wait and see.
I completely agree. And I do think, if anything, I echo the sentiment of we're seeing this growing mainstream acceptance of so many of these digital assets, at least signaled by Circle's stellar IPO, one that's been very fun to watch. But we will leave it there. So appreciate it, as always, Adam Lynch. And on a quick programming note, Galaxy Digital's Mike Novogratz will be featured on the next Market Overtime episode, dropping soon. So you're going to want to check that out. That's going to do it for Crypto Corner. Remember to like and subscribe to Schwab Network's YouTube page. I'm Jenny Horne. We'll see you again soon.